up, YouTube? It's your girl Kiki, and I am back with another video. And today I have a very special guest with me today, Mr. Aaron Jeter. Now, Mr. Jeter was my high school psychology teacher and my African American history teacher. So, Mr. Jeter, do you miss us?
I do. Every single day. Nothing like Kirsten in my class. Your energy has been missed since you graduated.
Well,
so
thank you.
I hope you're doing well. It's good to see you again.
I am.
Congrats on your college graduation.
Oh, well, thank you.
I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. So how long have you been teaching, Mr. Jeter?
I've been teaching since 2001, right after September 11th. I remember being at Shaw High School when the planes hit the towers, and that was my first couple of weeks of teaching, and I've been teaching ever since. Taught 2 years in Cleveland Municipal School District in 7th grade, middle school, 2 years in the DC area, and I've been in Solon High School since 2005. Also taught 6 months in Ghana, West Africa, where I had about 75 students in each class, so that was a great experience.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Where did you go to school?
Went to Ohio University.
And you pledged Omega Psi Phi there, right?
I pledged Omega Psi Phi my sophomore year and played football down there. I didn't play much, but it paid for the bills.
That's good enough.
Right.
All right, so let's get into these questions, Mr. Jeter.
All right, I'm trying my best.
So, how does it make you feel seeing a shift in the curriculum, specifically in terms of you having more freedom to educate your students on African American history?
I think it's a blessing. I think for too long, a lot of the notable scholars and academics, academicians in Black history have been not talked about. And when I proposed this new class to the Board of Education, they received it with open arms, and they basically said that they think it was long overdue to be taught here in Solon. And it's also great to see it being embraced across the nation. I think I've just read that advanced placement is going to start an African American history course as well. So I think after, unfortunately, George Floyd, that situation, a lot of people started to take notice about things that were missing and that needed to be implemented into the curriculum at earlier ages and stages.
For sure. So does this shift make you feel hopeful for the future curriculum that will be implemented in schools? Especially in regards to, like, you have 2 children, so of course you want them to learn more about African American history in school. So does it make you feel better about, the curriculum as your educator and your dad? So you can look at it from a teacher perspective and a parent's perspective.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that question to me. As far as my kids being 9 and 5 and 4th grade and kindergarten, I think that as the curriculum begins to expand, that I am hopeful that we'll learn more than just about Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks. But it's really up to the individual schools or teachers to kind of figure out other avenues and people they want to cover and movements they want to cover to kind of teach children, a more comprehensive history. Because ultimately, I think when you have a firm sense of who you are and the excellence that maybe your ancestors have accomplished, it gives you a better foundation to take school more seriously. Yeah. And I think that's the ultimate goal.
For sure. So do you think that you talked about the Board of Education receiving interest in having African American history as a course here? Do you think you would have had you would have embraced the same if you were in a private school setting?
It really depends. I think so. I think that sometimes it's about the presentation and what you want to communicate to the Board of Education or the Board of Directors, whoever's in charge of specific coursework. I think oftentimes, a lot of times these courses don't get proposed because there's not, a lot of maybe African American teachers and sometimes, white colleagues have told me, quite frankly, they don't feel as comfortable teaching African American history. Mm-hmm. I think that's unfortunate. I think sometimes, there are a lot of my white colleagues know a lot about the subject as well, but for whatever reason, they said they felt it needed to be taught by an African American teacher, which I understand their perspective, but if there's not a lot of people going into teaching, then who's going to teach the subject?
Right.
So,
do you think that Black students would receive being taught African American history well from your white colleagues?
I think if they're open to it, they're open to new knowledge, there might be a little bit of a roadblock at first, but I think if they feel that the teacher is well knowledgeable on the subject, they can learn a lot. I know that I do have white colleagues in other schools at Heights that have taught African American history, and they said it went well, but they did, sometimes encounter some pushback, as you mentioned. Well, who are you and why?
Yeah.
And I guess I asked you, do you think that would be a normal response?
Yes, I think personally, for me, and I think a lot of other students, it's all about representation. So when you see a Black teacher getting up there teaching you a Black subject, especially, a lot of students didn't grow up with having a lot of Black teachers. I know that when I was in school, like high school, I think you were the only Black teacher I ever had.
How about elementary and middle school?
I had one. I had one Black teacher in pre-K, but I don't really count that because I was in pre-K. But yeah.
Do you know the history of that? Do you know why it's kind of changed? I mean, because historically, there used to be a lot more African American teachers, in the 40s and 50s.
Right.
But once desegregation hit and the schools became more integrated, there became a lot less Black teachers and administrators.
Yeah.
So oftentimes there's been this misnomer that, separate but equal and that whole thing. We know that, but we know is that we lost a lot of Black educators after Brown versus Board education, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So.
and I think, like I said, representation matters, and it makes you take your education more seriously when you see somebody in front of you besides your parents that are encouraging you to do well in school. Because when your parents say it, it's like, okay. But then, like, when you have somebody who isn't your parent or not your peer or whatever, they're telling you, hey, listen, like, take this seriously, this is what happened, they fought for these rights. And I think that is sometimes the breakdown of, we go to schools in inner city schools and you see kids sometimes act up. I think it's not as well explained to them how blessed and lucky you are to be in an institution where you can go to school and not have to worry about, protests or anything like that. So I think
you make some good points.
I think that, thank you.
I mean, some of the behavioral issues in other schools are different than Solon. And
for sure.
Sometimes I wonder where that comes from.
Yes, and I wonder that too, because I know, like, my grandmother always said to me, she's like, y'all kids go to school, act up, and we march and we did this, because my grandmother, she was actually raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And
I visited once. There's a lot of history down there.
Yes, she's going again for her sister's birthday.
Oh, wow.
So she lived right on the corner from the Birmingham bombing.
Wow.
So she, was very...
She was there when
No, she lived right on the corner. She heard it.
Oh, wow.
So she just has a different appreciation for education than someone like me, or someone, because I didn't grow up having to, march and the dogs. I didn't have to do all that. So I think the breakdown is because I was blessed to be in a situation where my education, especially my Black education, was because of my grandmother, but was grown, and she did what she was supposed to do to help me understand, that she didn't have this back then, and her life wasn't the same. It wasn't like mine. I'm blessed to actually be in the situation. A lot of people fought, marched, died for everything, for all the rights. And like I said, I think that maybe that might contribute to the behavior that we see in inner city schools, because kids don't understand that breakdown of like what actually happened back then. They just see Martin Luther King and okay, cool, Rosa Parks, cool, Ruby Bridges, cool, okay, what else? Not kids understanding that the death of Emmett Till is really what started the whole movement to begin with. So I think that maybe, I don't know, I just feel like that might be a reason, because they don't understand.
Right. I think there's a lot of things I've read that if you start to see behavioral issues around 1960s, 65, and some historians have said that if you look at some of the programs that came in America, it was welfare, a lot of programs, and so women then had to choose if they were going to get that government assistance to help their children or a man in the home. And so sometimes they might be dating with some of the men that are, but they might not have been married or whatever. But once social services came in and said, you can't have a man in the home, otherwise you're not going to get the check, the women had to choose the check over maybe that person. And some theory is that once you bring a man, whether it's the baby's father or not, out of the home, that behavioral issues also change. That when you don't have a strong, and so my daughter tells me that being a divorced dad, and she says sometimes, my brother acts different in front of you than mom. So there might be something to be said by, even if if there's not a lot of male presence around, even though they might not be your immediate father, there's still that fear factor that was removed in the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah.
And some people think that's where boys started to lose their way, because there was nobody to kind of, make them a little bit second guess themselves.
Yeah,
I don't know.
sure,
That's
for
another
sure.
theory. So,
mothers are nurturers.
Right,
so,
right.
And you can get away with a lot more with your mom than your dad.
So sometimes they say the 1960s, whereas a lot of black men were kind of kicked out of the home because of the welfare program. Now, the welfare program did help a lot of women try to get on their feet, but they could not have a man in that, home. So that's another theory.
Is that really bad? Like, is that theory? Do they think like that's helping them? It might help them in a financial state, but
they think the behavioral issues started to escalate, and I can send you a link to that if you're interested in looking at that.
Oh yes, send me links. I'll put in the comments. Okay, so your mother had died, and your brother died, and it was all around the same time, right? It was all like close proximity. So how did you manage to work full time, take care of your children, all while trying to grieve the death of your mother and your brother, and still be a good educator and father?
That's a lot. Sometimes when they say when it rains it pours, and again, I think sometimes you have to stay busy, keep busy to try to persevere. That's one of the things that I learned, part of my fraternity is one of the cardinal principles is persevere through life no matter what you're dealt with. And I know that, when my mom was diagnosed with terminal blood cancer in 2018, I was able to rent my house out, move back in with her in Beechwood to take care of her that last year. And then dealing with all of that, I felt it was a blessing that I was able to kind of have that last year with her before she passed. And then, after that happened, that transition happened, there was this program at Cleveland State that I could get my master's degree in history for free. So I applied for that. I said, let me just get into something. And then the pandemic hit, and that changed everything, as you know. And I really think that it was a blessing that my mom passed when she did, talking to so many friends who had to bury their parents, and they could not say their last goodbyes because of the different laws and restrictions that were out there. It was just really agonizing for a lot of those families. So sometimes everything happens for a reason. But just getting into that master's program, being able to graduate kind of, I think the same year you did, and being able to take this African American history class that you took and turn it into a college credit class through Kent State was an ability to kind of keep me busy, keep me focused. And then my brother unfortunately passed in a motorcycle accident in Euclid. And, and just being able to be with him by his side, even though he was, pretty much in a vegetative state, it still allows you to say your last goodbyes. But to answer your question, I think sometimes you always got to remain prayerful. The guy kind of puts you on this course for a reason, and I kind of and it was a blessing that my kids in their own right got to see the full stage of life, because I know I didn't really go to that many funerals when I was growing up. I guess that's a blessing, but I think they understand that life is precious. They're not scared of dead bodies, and I had them, I wanted them to kiss and touch my brother and my mother, and so some kids can go their whole life and not really be able to understand death. So I think once you experience it, it could make you stronger.
That's true. I went to a lot of funerals. I went to one funeral since I was a baby, unfortunately.
But it's part of life.
It is part of life, and I think that's why like you said, it does give you more appreciation when you see it at a young age, and because when I was younger, I would think, my initial thought when I would go to funerals, oh, this can't happen to me, I'm too young. And then when I was hearing about, kids who were my age that were dying, I'm like, that is crazy. And ever since I've graduated high school and college, I buried 5 classmates.
From Solon?
Not from Solon, just, 2 from Solon, and then Melvin and Charnay.
Oh yeah, I was at both of them.
Yes. And then I had 2 other classmates that died when I was at Youngstown. And then I had a classmate. Well, she was more my friend. She went to a different school. She died 2 weeks after we graduated high school. So it definitely now it definitely teaches you how precious life is, because I'm just getting started with life. I'm in my 20s. So it definitely does give you appreciation, but I think it's important to have that foundation when you are younger. So then that way you understand,
don't take it for granted.
Yeah. And it's precious, and give people their flowers while they're here and be appreciative of everything, because it can be taken away from you like that. Like, it's crazy. Every time I see people trying to live this life they like on Instagram, I'm like, no, what's for you will be for you. And don't, because I guarantee that person might have something going on that you don't know about. You just see the designer and think it's cute. That's great. But yeah, this generation is definitely TikTok, Instagram.
Yeah, the attention span, sometimes you got to capture it, and hopefully people can listen to an entire podcast or read an entire article, because you do gain a lot. One thing that I liked about what you said early in this interview is that you have spoken to your grandmother about her experiences at Birmingham. And again, you just don't ever know when, you know, our time is our time. And for you to be able to have that conversation with your grandparents, I remember the ones I've had with mine, you know, but God rest their soul. But you, as you remember, you may or may not remember in our class, but we had this griot, African storyteller. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that lesson, but people had to go around the room and kind of whisper their little. Yes. And the griot in the African village was a person that is known to kind of keep all the family history, the village history. And it was through oral tradition that these stories are passed down. So if you don't know your grandparents' story because you haven't asked any questions, because you're so self-absorbed in your next video, then you're missing out on some history that's right in front of you. Right. So it's important to just take time with your elders, especially that you have close to your family, and be able to say, hey, look, let me pick your brain for a little bit. Yeah. Tell me, what was it like? And then it gives you that appreciation to take, you know, life more seriously, or realize it's not that serious. Yeah. I mean, I've been blessed to still have, well, my dad's parents are deceased, but my mom's parents, both of them are still alive. So I've just been blessed, because I know people who don't even need to meet their grandparents. Right. So I don't because God forbid something happens to them, I don't know what I would do, but like, at least I've had 22 years with them. Right. You know what I mean? My great grandmother, she's still living. She's 102. What? Yes. Wow. She's still living. That's showing my dad's side. She's in Cleveland? She is. 102, wow. Yes. So I, try to she's getting to that stage. She's still living in her house? No. Her house is in Michigan. She moved here. My auntie takes care of her. But she, so she's kind of getting to that stage where it's like, kind of hard for her to remember things a little bit. I can imagine. But, yeah. I'm 45, I can't remember. Yeah, she'd be like, who is this? I'd be like, okay, I see what you're talking about. Did you get a chance to see her? Yeah, she came to my graduation, actually. Oh, wow. She can still walk? No. Oh, okay. She has an electric wheelchair. Okay. So, because I didn't see her since my grandmother's funeral in 2019. So when I saw her at graduation, I was happy because, COVID and everything, and she was older. Your grandmother was at your high school funeral, right? My high school. Your high school graduation? That was my mom's mom. My dad's mom was not. She was sick. Okay. But yes, in 2019, that was the last time I saw her, and then COVID happened, so I really couldn't see her and everything like that. Once she wasn't people around her, which was understandable. But yeah, just circling back to, you gotta be appreciative, and I feel like I'm blessed because most people don't get to meet their grandparents, and the fact that I got to meet something is great to me. Yeah. Right. Next question. So do you feel like there's a challenge trying to teach African American history in such a diverse school? I think it's a challenge to try to get more students to take it, because I think there's some apprehension, well, that's, for a certain group of kids to take it. Right. And so one of my goals was, when I switched this course over to a Kent State course, that gives a weighted grade and college credit. And so this increases the GPA for students that are real conscientious about their GPA. So what I've noticed this year is there is a diversity of students that are interested in getting that weighted grade. And I think hopefully that builds some momentum to face some of the challenges that you kind of inquired about. Well, African American history is just for the African American kids and so on. And no, that's not the goal. I mean, the goal was, in order to kind of really expand on diversity and equity, I don't really necessarily believe it's into these, everybody circle up and trust fall and fall into each other's arms. I think, no, just take a regular course for credit. That's going to help you out. It's going to help your grade. Right. And you're going to learn something. You're going to save money. Yeah. But I don't believe in a lot of the, some of the diversity exercise. I don't think those are as helpful as versus to bring kids into a class and just discuss some issues. I don't know if you've ever been in any of those seminars where, close your eyes and imagine if, what color, but it's some things that businesses are bringing in to think that they can solve issues that way. I think sometimes I've gained a lot of friends from outside of my race just by either taking class together, playing sports together, but it's nothing contrived, it's not fake, it's just you're working hard together. If you're in the gym, you got something in common together. And if it's this class that brings you guys, some commonalities, then maybe y'all build a friendship off of that. But nothing that is, let's circle old hands and sing Kumbaya, and all of a sudden we're gonna just not be racist anymore or whatever.
Right.
I think it needs, in order to kind of break down some of the barriers, you need to be around each other's space for an extended period of time.
So how do you manage these challenges? How do you let our white peers know that this isn't just for African Americans, like African Americans? I see the title, but how do you manage the challenges? Let them know you can take this course too, you can learn something too.
Right. That's a good question. I've personally reached out to white students. I see them in the halls. I said, look, this is a class for everybody. I try to talk to the guidance counselors to try to push it that way because, sometimes they get into this class and I remember when Juneteenth became a national thing after George Floyd, a couple of other white students hit me on Instagram like, we learned this in your class. I'm glad we learned it here first.
Good.
So it's, and sometimes there's only so much time in a day that you can teach everything.
Right.
I mean, you think about how much the Chinese contribute to American history or Japanese. I mean, to really kind of get into everything, you might need a separate course for everything. Unfortunately, history is important, but
for sure,
where is the market? There's not that many history people lining up for jobs for a history major.
That's true.
So the thought is that you learn a little bit here and there, but I mean, if there's a job in welding and manufacturing, you got to also study that craft as well. So it's important to kind of be balanced and have a perspective on what classes that you need to take and what classes are going to help you, make a living.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you, not about high school, I can tell you our initial reaction to us taking African American history. So when we found out that the course was being available, which was my senior year, a lot of my friends and I, at the time, we were in high school, we were like, oh no, this is for us, this is our class. Like, we didn't really welcome our white counterparts as much as we should have. And I think that's because we've been so used to being in spaces where sometimes you sit down in class and there's not a lot of people that look like you. You sit down, you can't really be yourself. I know I found myself doing that in college, like being one of the only black girls in my major. It was kind of like intimidating. So like you don't see a lot of people that look like you, so you don't really want to say anything. So when you feel like you finally get something that's just for people that look like you, it is a little bit of, I feel like, exclusivity, because we've been so, what's the word I'm looking for? We've been excluded for a while, especially like us just fighting to go to school together. Like, that's too much in itself. And I feel like because black students have been excluded for so long, that I feel like, I wouldn't say it's too late, but it's like we really don't see any interest in trying to bring them into something that that is not necessarily ours, but our history. So it can be tough to try to include them when their ancestors didn't include our ancestors. So what do you think, it's 2022, we're trying to move on, we're trying to move forward. So what do you think, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's understandable?
Yeah, I can understand your perspective, man. I went to Beechwood, I went to Ohio University, and it can feel like, where are people that look like me, in these classes, in the halls or on the streets. And I think when you do get a class that's offered and you feel like other peers that look like you're going to take it, you do feel like I want to own this. I want it to be ours. In the same sense, I think you have to kind of take into consideration that there are other students who don't look like you who may also have a genuine interest in the subject.
Right.
And you should welcome that, and the fact that they have signed up and they did not care that they were the only ones, I think says something about their curiosity for learning. And I think if you stay humble and curious about why a person's there in your space that you think is normally for maybe you or your peers that look like you, I think you should welcome, the ability for all people to kind of gain some insight and knowledge to history that may not have been ever taught to them, especially, in their homes. I mean, so now there's some families that are well versed in a lot of different things, and they sit down at the dinner table and they talk about a lot of things. But for the most part, you know how busy we are in a day, and how much time can you even really kind of take in just to try to organize your day. So I understand the concern, and I understand that there was classes like that at Ohio University with black media for one, where it would be a lot of African Americans in that class, and we could feel like, oh, it's cool to see other people. But in the same sense, you have to kind of take into consideration your parents have moved to different districts,
right?
For different reasons.
Yeah.
A lot of parents have moved from Warrensville, from Bedford to Solon, for, quite frankly, a better opportunity for their children to kind of get through the day and take advantage of some of the opportunities that Solon has to offer. With that move comes maybe less diversity. And you have to kind of know that going into the school that you're at. Now, when I say to students, they maybe at the college campus, well, there are different schools you can choose. Right? So there's HBCUs. Now, what comes with that is the same amount of money, is the same amount of grant available. I always tell students, be very mindful of what financial package you're getting, because you have to look at what your debt to income ratio is going to be from 22 until 52, and how much you want to pay per month.
Right.
From what I've read, unfortunately, sometimes the HBCUs maybe don't have as large an endowment to give students scholarships. And so they have to weigh the pros and the cons, when looking at places and spaces that they may feel more comfortable based on skin color. But at the end of the day, you have to do what's best for you, and you have to take the classes that you think will best, prepare you for life. And if that means it being more diverse than you would like, I think that could also always look at it as an opportunity.
So you've been teaching for 17 years.
At
Solon. What is the biggest, shift that you see between the students? In my class, I graduated 4 years ago. Ooh, I can't believe it. That's like, time really flies.
Goes quick.
People say all the time, so I'm like, no, it's not. Flies. So what's the difference? What do you see as far, because kids, you had gotten a lot of kids right on the pandemic, for those year and a half to 2 years sometimes, like a little bit, people were virtual. Kids were virtual. So, that obviously kind of hindered their learning process a little bit, being virtual and trying to sit and just stare at a computer.
Well, you had to do that too.
I did. So what, actually, for a year and a half, I had to do it because...
You were at home or you were in
I was at home.
Okay.
Yes. What do you think is the biggest challenge of trying to, nurture these kids who were in the pandemic and trying to get them to focus on you, versus kids who when I was in high school, there was no pandemic. So we were in high school in person from 9th grade to 12th grade. So our attention span might have been a little bit better. I don't know. But what do you think is the biggest challenge of trying to get them to stay focused, because they had to, just coming from staring at a computer all day?
Yeah, we worked through a lot. The last 2+ years has been interesting for everybody around the world, and it's been challenging. I think to that human connection that was missing. I mean, although we've started to be conditioned prior to the pandemic to looking at screens and looking at people's stories, I still think that 2 years of trying to have meetings in school via Zoom and Google Classroom was a challenge. So the biggest thing is, how are we going to put the phones away temporarily? We brought in, you can see the cell phone caddies at the front of the room, which has been helpful. Initially, I was one of the teachers that was kind of saying, look, if the kids want to use their phones here and there, let them. The majority of the teachers said, look, it's probably better just to keep them out of sight, out of mind for the 50 minutes. And to be honest, I think I was wrong. I mean, I think the kids are responding well, but being able to, they're having more conversation, they're looking at each other, eye to eye. And that's important. One of my favorite quotes is by, a lot of times people don't like this, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. He said, education is good, but good manners get you farther. And sometimes good manners can only be learned, when you're in the same place and space with someone.
Sure.
And when you can say, look someone in the eye and say, hey, how are you doing? How's your day? Ask them a question, ask them a follow-up question. I think those are skills that have been lost, and they were being lost prior to the pandemic, but I think the the at-home time, the isolation only exacerbated an issue where people aren't really ready to have a real conversation.
Right.
Because their listening skills are already were kind of compromised before. And now it's like, oh, I really gotta look at you. So now it's kind of retraining the brain to that. So there have been some studies that have said that, masks has kind of inhibited learning for little kids because you can't see the full facial expression. I don't know if you remember in psych, but being able to see smile can really make a difference in somebody's life. So having kids to kind of look at each other and have a conversation, ask questions, I think is probably the best thing that teachers have done to kind of reacclimate kids to kind of, to each other, to looking at their faces and having a conversation one-on-one. It's been a challenge. It hasn't happened overnight, but we're still working at it. And it's a good question. We'll see how this has impacted us for years to come.
Yeah. So this book that you got, the Miseducation of the Negro and African American Heritage Book, Carter G. Woodson. Okay.
Yes, this is the person that's considered the founder of African American History Week in 1926. Month of February was because Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass were born in the month of February, so he felt like because there was missing curriculum, as you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, in 1926, he felt that African Americans would excel, they would thrive if they knew of some of the excellence of their ancestors prior to them in 1926. And it took off in various forms and fashions. Then officially the Ohio history, the connection at Kent State in 1970, the African American Student Union decided to kind of make that a month. And so that's kind of the Ohio, Greater Cleveland connection to African American History Month that's starting at Kent State. So it's a blessing that I'm actually teaching Africana Studies at Kent State with some of the professors there, given the connection to African American.
African Studies is so cool.
Well, yeah, I was through, that was a part, before I graduated, I wanted to make a college class through Kent. And so they interviewed me and they said that it looks like you would be a good fit for us this year. So there's students that are taking my class this year are getting Kent State credit, 3 credits. So,
I wanted to take Africana Studies, but every time I tried to take it, it was always filled up.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, Youngstown. Yeah, I always tried to take it. And then by the time I got around to it, I was like, oh, it's time. I don't even need that credit anymore. So I was like, it was unfortunate, but I was happy that at least I got to take African American history here in such a diverse school. I was very grateful. I was actually surprised. I was like, oh, but I was happy about it, honestly, truthfully. I think it's good. I think it's a good way to show Black kids, especially like me, that we are progressing, we are moving. I think because sometimes, when we see, especially after the death of George Floyd, when we see George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice, all these people, when we see killing after killing, it can be a little bit disheartening, and you don't think that the world is shifting into my thing is just like, it's 2022, like, why are you still racist? But I feel like I feel like sometimes you may think like the world might be just stagnant and like we're not trying to move forward. So I feel like this introduction of African American history to the curriculum can help give students more hope for the future. Now that we've seen, African American history being counted as AP credit, I feel like it'll give Black people more hope for the future to continue on fighting for what we want. And
I think that's important that you mentioned that, because when I ask students, so how much effort do you think they put in their studies? Some students surprisingly say very little, and other groups of students say a lot more. So I'm always interested again to get the response of how different groups of students take their academics and how seriously they take them.
Right.
And because if you look at some of our ancestors, to your grandmother's point, they took it very seriously. They didn't take it for granted. And so when they came to school, it was their business to excel. I'm not so sure, and maybe you could answer this better than me, how many students of color are coming to school serious, to really put 110% effort into getting A's and B's. Because I don't believe that we are any less from our inferior. But when I look at some of the GPA differences in Solon between Black students and their Asian and white counterparts, is significantly different. So I wonder if a course like this will help them say, look, my ancestors took school more serious maybe than I should. But I don't know because, from your perspective, going to school, one of the best schools, what do you think the effort level was of the students of color as far as taking, their homework home, doing it,
I think it depends on the person, really. Because I know there were some friends I went to school with that took their education very seriously, that were Black. Others, I don't know what happened there. But I think it might just be, I don't know, I feel like it can kind of be like intimidation because, so many people, like, there would be kids that would cry about an A. You'd be like, girl, I gotta see, what are you crying for? Like, you got a 90, okay? And so I think it can be kind of like intimidation, and sometimes they might get in their own head and be like, I can't do that, I'm not that smart, I'm not this, I'm not that, because there's a lot of people in Solon who have parents who are doctors, lawyers, and are very good at their jobs. So I feel like for white and Asian counterparts, sometimes they might feel that pressure to be as great as their parents, and some Black students don't have parents who are teachers or lawyers and doctors or whatever. So I feel like they might be like, well, get in their own head, but I can't do that, so I'm gonna just do enough to get by because I can't do what they can do anyway. I'm not that smart. So I feel like sometimes it can be like a mental thing, and there might be sometimes like where you have students, Black students that be like, well, I'm gonna be just as smart as them, if not smarter, because they're already thinking, because you might think that, well, they already probably think I'm dumb anyway, so let me go ahead and show you why I'm not dumb, or let me show you, why your thinking is flawed. So I think it can be a breakdown of just like their mental state, where they at mentally, what's going on, what are you thinking about, so I think that's another thing that
the negative self-talk.
Yes, that might be contribute to
a
students.
A variable as to why they maybe are not doing as well as they could.
Right.
Psychology is deep. It can affect our psyche and our internal, outlook on how we will perform. So you hope classes like this will show you that under even more dire circumstances that our ancestors continue to persevere and see it through. And they didn't let any roadblocks, to your point, stop them from getting their education and really taking it seriously. And so that's the hope. That was his hope. That was Carter G. Woodson's hope. At the end of the day, how can you take this history and apply it to something that could be marketable and say, look, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be the best bricklayer. I'm going to be the best lawyer, doctor, whatever it is I'm going to do. I'm going to do it 110% because it's those habits that are built early that are going to stay with you. So if you come in, focus, sit down, take notes, even in a boring class of a teacher that you can't stand, just realize it's preparation for a meeting that you'll be in that's going to be boring. Well, about a job. So it's like, how do you train your brain to get into the process of dealing with the mundane, the stuff that's not always exciting, that's not 30 seconds on TikTok. You got to sit there and focus.
Right.
So it's about mental training. The earlier that you take school serious and look at it just as a training format or something else, then maybe you can see those dividends.
Do you find it helpful to implement some of this new technology in the classroom to help your students learn?
I think some of it could be beneficial. Sometimes that immediate feedback to kind of see whether or not they are grasping the material. Sometimes you might give this great lesson and you think, oh, hey, they got it. And you put a question on the screen and 30% of people got it right. You're like, okay, that didn't work. So, sometimes you think you could be screaming from the mountaintop and it resonated with them and nobody got the question right. And somehow you need to go back and say, that didn't work. So technology like that can help. And there's so much that's moving so quickly, and sometimes it's hard to keep up with. But that was one of my papers, my final dissertation was how AI technology could kind of look at students' engagement, where, those algorithms to kind of say facial feedback and all this stuff. Can you monitor a student's engagement by just a video camera? Because you know when people are tuned out. So if AI can kind of hit you with a couple text messages, student in the back corner is zoning out again, and you can't keep up with 30 kids in the class. Right. That'll help you go over there and redirect her. So lots changing with technology. It's about, but just like anything, if you get back to the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, I think those old school teachers, they got through a lot with a lot less. And it's really about to some old school, just, is a respect for education, is a respect for the teachers, a respect for the student. Some of those things have been lost in the process through a lot of the changes in society, as I mentioned, 1960s and other things. It makes it harder to get through, a traditional lesson plan. And a lot of those kids didn't have all the bells and whistles. I mean, you talk to some of our grandparents and parents, they just sat there and took notes, and they still remember their times tables and everything else a lot quicker than some of my students right now. So I think you can bring out all the new technology, but sometimes it's just some of that old school stuff. You should not let lose that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Mr. G, you were everybody's favorite, as you know.
I beg to differ. I think there's some other teachers out here that, I think I had a quirkiness to me that people like to laugh at, but
Well, you were my favorite.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Kirsten, I always remember our psych class. I'm not gonna say no names, but but you and I would always we'd always notice the students that were upset sometimes. So
upset.
Anyway.
Well, you were very liked. I will say, out of other teachers, I saw you were very well liked. I know you've been an inspiration to me and a lot of the students that I've talked to, and your students before me. So how do you continue to inspire your students as the world changes? There's so much negative influence. We see a lot of teachers not, going on strike nowadays because, payment or because of, I guess they weren't getting paid enough their salary. I know actually at my school, at Youngstown, my junior year, they went on strike because they were cutting their salary by like 10%. So the professors went on strike, and my auntie, she went to Youngstown and she graduated in 2005, and she said the same thing happened when she was in school. Yeah. So we've seen a pattern of teachers being mistreated and not being compensated well. So with all of these negative things that, kind of surround teachers, how do you continue to be an inspiration to your students?
That's a good question. I think some of my students have said to me over the years, I've sometimes talk about other jobs that I've had, even at night, either whether it be bartending, shipping dead bodies.
You ship dead bodies?
It was a logistical kind of company.
I know, but like, oh my gosh.
But like when people pass away, they need to be shipped. Sometimes they want to be buried in another city. So I was working on that on the phone, talking to different funeral coordinators.
Okay.
I bring all these experiences up just to say that sometimes students have said, I appreciate that you have had other experiences outside of just the classroom.
True.
Because it makes it more meaningful, and it's honest that sometimes, you need extra money. And I didn't come from a family. I mean, I was in Beechwood, but nothing was left to me where I had a trust fund or anything. So if you need to kind of work an extra job, I'm not scared to admit that to my students. I have students that visited me bartending at Zanzibar when I first started, and I wasn't ashamed to serve them a plate, because that's something that, if you're in a financial situation, you got to do what you have to do.
Right.
And so some students have appreciated the fact that I could be working at a number one school district and also have a side job to pay extra bills, and keeping it real, like, I'm on the gram talking about I'm broke, instead of, I drive a Camry, I drive a 1999 Camry. There's nothing about, my life that's going to, try to floss or to pretend to be something I'm not. In addition to that, as far as inspiration, it's constantly learning, and it never stopped that. So some students have appreciated the fact that, I started jujitsu. Now I'm getting my ass kicked in that, but, it's when 20-year-olds are slamming you, it's kind of hard starting something at 44, 45 and thinking that you kind of tough, and next you losing every match. But
yeah.
I'm going to win a couple eventually. I'm going to post it, but but
keep telling you something.
Yeah, right.
Keep going.
But the thought is that, I think to be an inspiration, you have to constantly kind of continue to learn. If you're going to ask your students to learn something that could be boring, you have to be also willing to learn something new yourself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we get so stuck on our ways, the older we get, you have to constantly want to try to figure out something new, whether it be a new place to visit or a new skill. It's hard to try to learn something new at an older age, but I think that could be a source of inspiration too. So
it is. It definitely is. Last question. If there's one piece of advice you could give your current students and former students, what would it be?
Wow. I think there are two phrases I think a lot of students and a lot of people in life are sometimes fail to kind of really incorporate, and that would be thank you and I apologize. Those are two phrases that I think if you realize that you're on the wrong side of something, whether it be an argument with your family or friends, be humble enough to admit that you were wrong and apologize to that person, and specifically talk about why. Because a lot of years can go by, with y'all holding grudges, and because somebody is not willing to admit they were wrong or they reacted the wrong way. So an apology can go a long way. And thank you for somebody, I think sometimes students take for granted what their parents are sacrificing or what their grandparents are sacrificing.
Yeah.
And just giving a simple thank you for going to work every day to provide this for me.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised. I tell my students all the time how shocked your parents would. You might set your whole year differently if you say that to them at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
But if just having that, saying thank you and I apologize. And one last thing is that, and this goes on the same line as this, is have gratitude for what you have, and also have perspective. That if somebody has a different political view than you, don't immediately kind of count them as just being racist or this and that. Understand where they might be coming from. And I think a lot of times we might be lacking that perspective to think that we just want to write them off and put them in this bucket or this bucket. Take a minute to kind of decompress and figure out, well, okay, I can see why they voted for this person. It might not because they want to put on a white Klan hood. It could be, it could be some other reasons that have nothing to do with what I've been told to think. So those are four things, I guess it would be. Thank you, I apologize, and also have gratitude and perspective about life. And I think once you have incorporated those four things, it'll allow you to appreciate the little things a little bit better.
I agree. I definitely agree. My grandmother told me that, because she paid for me to do dance, and dance was not cheap. And she told me that, I knew you appreciated it. So I was like, okay, good. My mission was accomplished. And if you knew at a young age that I appreciated everything you were doing for me, because I still will tell her now, like, thank you for everything. Her and my mother, my whole family actually, they all did a lot. It takes a village to raise a child. Like, that's serious. So I definitely agree. You definitely have to be appreciative and love on everybody while you're here. And, especially because going to school at Sullivan, my church is
what church you at?
Good Shepherd Baptist Church.
Okay, I'm looking for a church. Where is that at?
It's in Euclid.
Okay.
So being in a church where so it's not as and going to church there and seeing how we had Awana at my church growing up, and a lot of kids weren't as blessed as I was, and I found myself being judgmental. Like, I would be like, they were, I've never been on a plane before. I'm like, you never been on a plane before? And I would kind of look at them like, what you mean? Like, and I guess I felt like every kid's supposed to have what I have. And now, like, growing up, I see like that was so flawed. And I should have not done that. But, you live and you learn and you grow. And I think it did give me a sense of more appreciation, because my grandmother would be like, some kids, like, this would be their only meal, and you never know what, homes that some kids were coming from. And so I would just kind of be like, wow, I'm so grateful that I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to, I didn't know what foster care was until I got, older. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, what did I understood what adoption was, because I had some people in my family that were adopted, but foster care, I didn't understand that. So they had to kind of explain it to me. So I think that also contributed to me being appreciative. Is I think another thing kids have to do is parents place their students, not their kids, in an environment where they're not around people that are just like them. So my grandmother took my mom and my auntie to Africa when she was, but right before I was born.
Okay.
My auntie, she spent a whole summer over there. So
what part?
Ghana.
Okay.
Yes, I was gonna go my senior year in college.
Your grandmother took your two.
My auntie, my mom.
Okay.
Her kids.
And what year was that?
1999.
That was the year before I was there. I was in 2000.
Oh, really? Yeah.
They were how long were they there?
My auntie they went over there a few times actually. I think they might have been over there for a couple of weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, they were over there for a while.
I wish I would have known that at the graduation. I would have talked to them about that. Remember at your high school?
Yeah. Don't worry, I'll get a chance to talk about it. And I was supposed to go to Africa actually for senior year, but COVID, so they canceled it, so we couldn't go. But yeah, she took them to Africa, and that really like humbled them and showed them how blessed they were. And I feel like that can be another thing with, you know, students who are in Solon. Clearly, I wouldn't say we're more well off, but we have more opportunities versus kids who are in Euclid, who are in, you know, inner city schools, the Cleveland public school system or something like that. So I think in order to try to get, especially students now who are so into like their phone, I think it might be helpful or beneficial to put students in a place where kids don't have the same opportunities you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think
that might add to that perspective that we're talking about. You know, I mean, sometimes we lack that because we, like you said, we think that everybody's supposed to be on a plane or, you know, have to have 3 meals a day.
Right.
Nothing is guaranteed.
Right.
And I think once people realize that, they'll start to appreciate the relationships they do have.
Right.
Because just by showing up every day is not enough. You have to put in the sweat equity. You got to put in the work.
Sure.
And whatever it is that you do. And if you don't, maybe you just taking it for granted. Nothing's guaranteed.
Yeah.
So, and I think sometimes, you know, we lose sight of that.
Yeah.
And by traveling and seeing the world, seeing a different part of the city, will sometimes expose you to that. So traveling is a thing that I think everyone should do. But if you can't travel, you know, I still think you can still gain some perspective without, you know, without that. Just a little humility, realizing, let me think before I say something. And I've been guilty of saying things that I didn't think through. I think we all have, but you know, we can't.
I have.
We can't get that back. So I think once somebody, a civil rights activist said, we are greater than the worst thing we've ever done. So don't judge somebody on that one thing that was so bad. Look at the whole body of work, you know, of that person's life before you just think about, oh, he said this or she said that. Be careful not to be so judgmental on the worst thing, because they could have also done something great that you just hasn't been brought to your attention. So be mindful before you just write somebody off, because that same person that maybe did something horrible did something great 3 times greater, you know. So
it's giving lessons always. Alrighty, well that is all that I have for you.
Well, I want to say I thank you for giving me this opportunity on your YouTube channel, and I really I'm honored to be one of your guests, one of your first guests maybe, or first a couple guests. But I appreciate the questions they were well thought out, and I'm very proud of all your accomplishments, and I look forward to seeing you continue to excel in life, and I hope you continue to stay in touch.
You know I will, Mr. Jeter. Inside joke, y'all. Inside joke.
Jeter. Jeter is pronounced Jeter in French, so she was a great French student, I think.
No, I actually got a D.
Oh.
I had to take it in college.
Right.
And I actually got a C the first time, and I got a D the second time. It's okay though. I still
But I appreciate you always saying Mr. Jeter. Jeter.
Alrighty. Well, thank you guys for joining us. That is all for Kiki's Convos today.